Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes to let everyone else trickle in. Carly, can you hear me okay?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. All right, thank you guys for being so punctual. We'll just wait one more minute and we'll get started. All right. Hello and welcome to our transmission line routing presentation. My name is Francesca Bridwell and I'm the marketing manager for Braun and Gresham. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. For questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom. We'll be answering questions today at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to submit them at any time during today's session. To access the Q&A feature, scroll over your screen and you'll see a toolbar pop up either at the top or the bottom of your screen. On that toolbar, you will see the option for Q&A. If you click that, it's going to open up a pop-up box where you can type in your questions directly. Those questions will be seen by Carly and myself, and as I mentioned, we'll be answering those at the end of today's presentation. So without further ado, Carly, please take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carly Barton, and I'm an attorney and counselor at Braun and Gresham Attorneys at Law. I'm here today to do a presentation about transmission line routing 101, kind of the basics that every landowner needs to know about what is the transmission line routing process in Texas, what it's like, and how can you participate and be a part of it. So first, I want to tell you a little bit about Braun and Gresham. Braun and Gresham is a law firm out of Dripping Springs, Texas. We mainly represent rural landowners all over the state of Texas in anything that a rural landowner might need. So these are our main areas of practice and what we can do. You can see, of course, transmission line routing right there at the top with those structures, but we also have condemnation, real estate planning, conservation easements, property tax, risk management, and renewable energy. So really what I like to tell people about Braun and Gresham is we really are just problem solvers for landowners. If you own rural land in the state of Texas, you know that there are just lots of issues that can pop up that you've never even anticipated. And so what we try to do for our clients is to help be that problem solver, especially when you've got legal problems. And we've got 15 attorneys to do that. We are a growing firm, but we have 15 lawyers who all each have their own areas of expertise. Myself, I'm a little bit of a generalist. I do a little bit of everything, but one of my favorite areas of practice that I do is transmission line routing. And that is along with Patrick Resnick, who is another lawyer at our office. He's a partner here at the firm. He's been doing it for many, many years. I've been doing it since I joined the firm about 6.5 years ago. But I will tell you, there's usually not a contested transmission line routing case that we're not involved in. It is a fun area of practice. I'm a little bit of a nerd, so I say it's fun, but it's a very unique area of practice. And, we're one of the few law firms in Texas who only represent landowners. So we have a very good grasp of what it's like to go before the Public Utility Commission in these kinds of cases. So why are we here? Why is this such a hot button issue? And what's coming to Texans in terms of the electrical grid and transmission lines? So unfortunately, after Winter Storm Uri in 2022, we're all too familiar with ERCOT and grid conditions and rolling blackouts and the strain that that our grid felt for many issues due to the winter storm. But Texas is really at a crossroads, and it's not, and it has a many things are happening that are putting this strain on our electrical grid, and the reasons for improving it and moving towards 765 kilovolt lines. And so the first one, of course, is just population growth. Texas is a very is a healthy state with a healthy economy, and so we see people moving here all of the time, and that growth is, of course, happening a lot in those city centers. The second thing we have going is the industrial and oil and gas electrification. So up until more recently, your oil and gas operations out in the Permian Basin were not powered by the grid. That is changing. And with that change, there has been a very increased demand out in West Texas for transmission line capabilities and transmission level pulling from the grid. Additionally, of course, we're seeing these data centers and AI and crypto mining happening throughout the state as well. Those, of course, require a large amount of power and pull from that grid. And so that's another reason that we're seeing this need for more transmission lines. And then lastly, we do have a growth in our renewable and energy storage, right? So we're not just talking about wind turbines and solar, but we're also talking about that battery storage that goes with it. And so as these industries and these energy abilities grow, that in turn also means we've got to create a grid that can keep up with all four of these growing concerns in the state. So what are we doing about it? The Public Utility Commission of Texas has recently greenlit a move towards 765 kilovolt lines. And just to put that in perspective, if you're driving down the highway and you see one of those really big giant lattice structure transmission lines you can see in the distance, those lines are 345 kilovolt lines. We are looking at almost doubling that with a 765 kilovolt line. So that's almost, that's a very large increase in the kind of power that's going, the amount of power that's going through it. It does require larger structures. It has a bigger footprint. And so these 765 kilovolt lines are quite larger, but they are more efficient. And so that is why the commission has looked to this as a way to reinforce our grid, to make sure that the power is moving where it needs to be. And so with that, I'm going to show a picture here. So this is a map that came out of a couple of studies through the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT. But it shows that you see those 3 orange lines that are coming, you see from West Texas headed towards those population centers, towards I-35 basically. But you see those 3 orange lines are proposed 365 kilovolt lines headed from West Texas to Central Texas, essentially. And so those were proposed as a larger Permian Basin resiliency plan that was done by the Public Utility Commission, and to determine what was the amount of infrastructure needed for this very growing, the electrification of oil and gas, for this growing data mining, AI centers, for the growing renewables out there. So, and it really is all 3 of those things. So that's highly increased the demand. And so that's why they need those 765 kilovolt lines. You'll also notice there's an eastern part of this as well. You see those magenta or pink lines. Those are also proposed 765 lines they're not out yet. They're just part of a greater plan for the state of Texas to look at. Additionally, you might have also heard some of our friends out in East Texas. They have 500 kilovolt lines headed out there. There's one that crosses that is about to get approved that crosses like 7 counties, right? And that is to help with integrating the grid into, or excuse me, ERCOT into MISO, which is the southern states grid that they work off of. So there's a lot going on in terms of transmission lines in Texas being built, integrations, upgrades, things like that to try and keep pace. So, and I'm going to show you, you'll notice these 3 orange lines. I'm going to show you, because those are the 3 projects that are coming up where we are in the open meeting phase of these projects. They've been studied and they're trying to get to the point where they're going to be filing an application. And so I'm going to go through each of those lines. I'm going to start with the southern orange line. So this is the project. This is AEP is the utility who is doing this project. It's called the Howard to Solstice project. Usually these titles are the substation names that they're trying to pick a route from, and really what happens is they locate where that substation needs to go on each of those places, and then lots of engineers go and study the areas in between, lots of information from GIS, reconnaissance things, and they try to map various routes across the study area. And some say it's spaghetti. It looks like spaghetti thrown on a wall. Kind of looks like a spider web as well. But these are not. These are all of the options that they have proposed that of each segment to get to between those 2 substations. So you'll notice it's a little hard to see on here, but you'll notice there's a little black dot inside those black dots. It's a number. So each of those are line segments. They're segments or links. You'll hear that word interchangeably, but all of these segments or links makes up the route. And so that is what one of these looks like. Another one that we've got is the middle orange line heading from Schleicher County into Bell County. This is an LCRA and Encore line. Those are the utilities on this particular 765 line. We've got the Big Hill substation going into the Bell County East switch, which is Encore. And so you'll notice this is a little bit different. This is the map that they start with. This is the study area that they're looking at, and then they will put their I'm going to show you what it looks like after they put those lines on a piece of paper. So this is the eastern half of the study area. You'll see Temple there, and then as it moves further out west towards Brady. And you can see this is a little bit zoomed in, so you can see each of those links or those segments that are comprising a line. So right, G5, G6, G4. Now, all of these segments are going to be noticed. You should, if you are on one of these segments, you should have gotten something in the mail from LCRA or Encore telling you that there is an open house or an open meeting. They'll tell you the times of those open meetings, and it's usually in the community, and you can go look at their lines, ask questions, and also complete a questionnaire, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. So that's the eastern side of the study area. And then of course it extends over into Schleicher County. And you can see how each of those lines kind of put them together to create that route. One of the most important things that you can do when you're building a route, there's something that you have it has to be forward progressing. So there's no kind of going back and forth and making too much of an S. You can't take, you can't take R2 to P3 and then go back on O3 into P2. So you've got to keep it going towards that substation to make sure that those lines are forward progressing. And then we're going to get to that northern orange line. This is the third of the 765 kilovolt lines that we are that are currently in that kind of open house pre-application time. But this is Longshore switch to Dinosaur switch. This is an encore line. And you can see it's a little harder to see on this picture. Those red lines with the dots in between, those are current transmission lines that are already in that area. And then the dashed lines are those proposed segments as well for this study area and how to get from those two substations. So what does this all mean? We've got these three 765 kilovolt lines that are coming. We know they're coming, and what can we do about it? So there is certainly regulatory momentum toward larger scale transmission. There's some public policy reasons why they want to do these 765 lines. The first is that while these are of course quite a burden on the landowner that does get the 765 line, it moves more power than you have to get to 4 or 5 345 kilovolt lines to get to that much power moving. And so additionally, it's better grid reliability. So that is really kind of why they're moving towards this larger scale transmission than what's been in the past. Additionally, I read that with the electrification of oil and gas, with the AI and data centers, with the battery storage, with the solar, this is the first, this is a huge transformation in the amount of electricity the state of Texas needs that hasn't been seen since the 60s when we were introducing air conditioning at a residential level. So that's the amount of change that is happening in our electrical system. And so that is part of that movement towards the larger scale. And of course, with that comes issues of environmental integrity and land stewardship, right? That we have a lot of landowners in Texas pride themselves in what they've done to be a good land steward, to take care of the environment and their wildlife populations and things like that. And how can these transmission lines affect that is certainly a concern for many out there. And then how do we balance this infrastructure that is important, right? That we do need, but how do you balance that with private rights? And how do you, why do rural landowners have to bear the burden of this infrastructure? And so what is very great, I would say, about a transmission line is that you actually get to participate in the process of picking that route. If an oil and gas pipeline wants to come through your land, they get to come through your land. And if that's how the path that they want to take, there is no routing at the Railroad Commission in Texas. You don't have a say on the path that pipeline takes. On a transmission line, you do. You are part of the process. You have a say in the process, and you can many times influence the route that is taken. So it is quite different, and it's very exciting to be a part of that process. Like I said, because with a lot of infrastructure, you don't get that opportunity to really participate. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Public Utility Commission, and which is where all these transmission line routing occurs. So first, the Public Utility Commission of Texas, it's the regulatory body for electricity, telecommunications, water, and wastewater. So that's your water providers, not your water rights or water quality. That does belong to TCEQ. But this is your regulatory body for your utilities, right? It can have up to 5 commissioners. That was a change from Winter Storm Uri. After that occurred, there was a lot of changes in the Public Utility Commission, but they moved it from 3 commissioners to 5. Now, currently, we only have 3. That's Chairman Gleason, Commissioner Jackson, and Commissioner Haltman. Chairman Gleason and Commissioner Haltman are relatively new. They've been there for a year or less. Commissioner Jackson has been there for a couple years, but all of them are new since Winter Storm Uri. So there has been quite a bit of turnover with the commission after that occurred. And so, and part of that was adding 5 commissioners instead of the 3 that it used to be. And so what does the Utility Commission do? Well, they do rule makings, right? So when the legislature meets and they pass laws, the Public Utility Commission can implement rules about how they're going to put those laws into place. They do rate regulations, right? So as in the state of Texas, you are a ratepayer, and in order to get those rates back, there are rate cases that each utility has to go through. Compliance and enforcement, make sure they're following the rules. They are the oversight body for ERCOT. ERCOT is the independent system operator for the grid for Texas. And like I said, I think most people didn't know what ERCOT did until, of course, all of our power was out in 2022. So we're unfortunately more familiar with ERCOT than probably most of us would like. But the important part for this discussion is that they issue certificates of convenience and necessity. And what is a certificate of convenience and necessity? It is a permit that grants a utility a geographic monopoly for providing a utility service. So in this case, electricity is the one we're concerned about, right? And those permits that allow the certificate of convenience and necessity, when a utility wants to add a new transmission line to the grid, they have to amend their certificate of convenience and necessity. So you will see that that wording happening and used in these kinds of cases. So we call them a CCN, so it's a CCN case. And when there's an application to amend your CCN, that just means they're going to amend it and do a transmission line route, and that the commission is ultimately going to select that route. Also, the Public Utility Commission then also does consumer protection for the citizens of the state as well. If you feel like your utility company is hurting you in some way. With the Public Utility Commission, we also have to talk about the State Office of Administrative Hearings. So when a utility company files an application to amend their CCN, that application gets referred to, the Public Utility Commission refers it to the State Office of Administrative Hearings. And so what is this State Office of Administrative Hearings? So it's when a state of Texas agency, so this means not just the PUC, but TCEQ or any of your licensing places, when they take a certain action against a person or business, the law often allows the person or business to request an administrative hearing to challenge that action, right? So you'll see this on like probably or most people are familiar with like a driver's license suspension that might have occurred. That happens through a contested case hearing at at SOAH, for short, is what we call it. And so there are a bunch of judges who will preside over these actions, and they are called administrative law judges, or ALJs. We really like our acronyms in this line of work, so trying to give you what they are. So when people say, oh, it's going to SOAH to hear by the ALJ for a CCN process, you'll have an idea of what they're talking about. And so when a hearing is requested, the agency sends or refers the case to SOAH for a hearing, right? So the PUC refers these applications for transmission line routing to SOAH for an ALJ to hear. And so those are some examples, right? We've got our insurance, workers' comp, transportation, but utility regulation at the bottom there, right? That's what we're concerned with and what SOAH can do. So what does this process look like? What can you expect going through everything and going, what does a CCN process look like for a transmission line? So it is a fast and furious 180 days. In the past, there used to be the utilities and the landowners and the participants in this case used to get a whole year to do all of these things that we're about to go through. And it was only 180 days if it was dubbed a critical needs project, which means that ERCOT had identified the project as something that's critical for the needs of the electrical grid. But now we do it all in 180 days. And it is fast and furious because of some restraints that we'll talk about. But it is quick, and it is important to be on top of the deadlines because they are coming very, very quickly. So we talked a little bit about these utility open houses. Those are the maps that we looked at earlier are from those utility open houses where they go out, they send out these preliminary maps to the community and say, we want your feedback about these. We want the information about them. And so that they can refine their application a bit, go through it, see if there are some segments that are just unconstructable. Maybe there's a habitable structure that they missed when they were looking at the maps. So that is where we are for those three projects. All of those open houses have occurred. Now, after the open houses occur, then the utility will file their applications. And like I said, those applications are an application to amend their CCN, and it usually for a 765 kilovolt line, and then it'll list out all the counties that are impacted by it. So in that application, it is lengthy. It's going to have a lot of information in there. It has a environmental assessment in there, which in and of itself is a few hundred pages. It has lots of data and information, maps. So the application is quite lengthy and has a lot of information in there. And so when that application is filed, if you're an impacted landowner by this transmission line project, you will receive notice in the mail. And so what do I mean by if you're impacted or not? So under the Public Utility Commission rules, there are two ways that you can intervene in the process. So you are either crossed by a potential transmission line, route or segment, or you have a habitable structure within 300 or 500 feet of the center line of the proposed transmission line. So I say 300 or 500. 300 is for those smaller kilovolt lines, that's 230 or below, and then 500 feet for your larger voltage. So if we're talking about a 765 line, we're talking about 500 feet. So if you are crossed or have a habitable structure within 500 feet of that center line, you get to intervene in this process. You get to participate in this process. You're a party to the case. So what's really important is that intervention deadline is typically 45 days from when the application is filed. And very importantly, it can be shortened. It can be shortened by the administrative law judge. So this is it is the most critical deadline. If you get anything from this presentation, it is that you've got to intervene in time to participate in it. And you got to file that motion for intervention and get that on the record. So that is a very important deadline, because if you do not meet your intervention and you are crossed by a route, or you might have a habitable structure within that 500 feet, if you are not an intervener in this at this point, you don't get to participate. You don't get to have a say in where that transmission line goes. You don't get to put forth your testimony into the record. And that's what's really important, because it's got to be in the record in order for the Public Utility Commission to consider it. So what are we talking about when talking about in the record? So what we're doing is, after you intervene and say, hey, I'm affected, I want to participate, we are moving toward what's called a hearing on the merits on the application. And so what is a hearing on the merits? I like to call it a mini trial. There's no jury. We just have our administrative law judges, but it is a trial in the sense that you have testimony, you can be cross-examined, and then there's some limited discovery that can occur as well, but also ultimately and then there's a closing brief at the end to argue about the law and the facts that are presented in the application and in the testimony, and then that you are going to participate in that hearing on the merits. So importantly, about the hearing on the merits, if you do intervene and you don't show up at the hearing on the merits, and you don't enter your testimony that you can file, then it will not be on the record. After the hearing on the merits, the administrative law judge gets 60 days to issue what's called the proposal for a decision. That proposal for decision is then the recommendation that the ALJ makes to the Public Utility Commission. And so once they make that recommendation about what route should be taken, then it goes to a public utility open meeting. So the PUC has open meetings at least twice a month. It's down in Austin. You can go, you can even you can watch one on streaming. And that open meeting is where they will decide what route to take. We're going to get into how they decide that in just a second, but I just wanted to give you, these are the main steps of what's going to happen in those 180 days. So what is the role of public participation, right? Well, you get to submit your own testimony. You get to talk about your land and the impacts that this transmission line is going to have on it. You can object to other people's testimonies or issues that you don't think maybe are relevant to this. And you can also have organized responses. A lot of times you are able to band together with your neighbors in order to potentially push the route in a different location, right? So many times the people who participate in a CCN process have influence over the routes, have influence on the way that it can go, and it's really important part of the process. In terms of what you can do, the practical tips for landowners is just get involved in the process. Don't think, oh, well, it's never going to hit me. In the application, the utilities have to put in, they have to select a route. It's their preferred route, or you'll hear it as the best meets route, but they select a route that they think is a good route. And people oftentimes say, okay, well, that's just going to be the route. That is not the case. Those things can change. And so it is important to be a part of that so that you can change it. Or if you like that route, you can advocate to keep it there. But that is one of the things that you can do in this. And so how do we decide? How does the commission even decide what route they're going to take? What are we arguing about at that hearing on the merits and in front of the Public Utility Commission? So there are numerous routing factors under the statute that they have to consider. These are the first ones. These are under the Public Utility Regulatory Act, Chapter 37.056C. But these are the things that they have to look at. Need, right? This transmission line can't just be, oh, well, we want it. There has to be a need for it. And that need is really important because because you don't want them just building transmission lines because they feel like it, right? So The need has to be there. There has to be an analysis of why this transmission line here and now and in this particular location. Additionally, they have to consider community values. And so, and I'll tell you, I'm going to read off the definition that they say is the community values before the Public Utility Commission, but it's a shared appreciation of an area or other natural or human resource by a national, regional, or local community. Adverse effects upon community values consist of those aspects of a proposed project that would significantly alter the use, enjoyment, or intrinsic value attached to an important area or resource by the community. So these community values are shaped by the questionnaires that the utility companies have sent out at their open houses that they do at those open houses, open meetings before they file the application. So this is I guess this is the second thing that I want everyone to know about this process, which is if you want to influence what the community values are, you need to respond to those questionnaires. You need to show what is important to your community, and because anyone can fill out those questionnaires. So that is why the community values part in those questionnaires are very important. The next part is the next factor to be considered is recreational and park areas, right? So, and these in general have to be designated for the public. So this isn't just your ranch. Your ranch isn't a recreational area. It has to be designated and the public can get to it. So they want to try and avoid those. And then they also have to consider historical and aesthetic values, right? So we're looking at any kinds of archaeological things. The aesthetic values is that one's a little difficult, I will say. They look at, the length of the transmission line in the foreground of a highway and some interesting things, but the aesthetic values is a little more squishy and obviously a little more personal, right? So that one can be a little bit difficult to argue about, or I guess it's usually just not one that pushes the route a certain way. And then environmental integrity. So there is, we want to make sure that we are picking a route that does the least amount of damage to the environment as possible. And what is really interesting, right? You'll notice we've got some factors here, but we have even more. And what the commission and the ALJs have to do is they have to balance all of these factors, right? Because there might be one that's really good for community values, but it might be terrible for the environment, right? And so they have to go through all of these factors. We submit evidence and testimony on all of these factors, and then they're weighed in a way to which they try to figure out what is the best line that satisfies all these criteria. And there's never one route that satisfies them all. It's honestly, I just think it's impossible, but they're trying to get to the best one that they can find. Some of the other factors that can be considered: cost. And cost is a big one. Cost is the one that is big because on a transmission line, this isn't a utility company coming in and paying for the transmission line. The costs to build these lines are pushed back on the ratepayers of Texas. And not just for the ratepayers in the area that's getting the transmission line, it's for the entire state. So that is a really important routing factor that the commission considers, because they don't want to be increasing your electricity bills just because, just because the utility company says so, or they wanted it a certain route. So cost is a very important factor that we look at. Another important factor we look at is paralleling. And when we talk about paralleling, we're talking about a bunch of different kinds of paralleling, but it's where the transmission line is going in relation to other features. So is it paralleling a road? Is it paralleling another transmission line? Is it paralleling a property boundary line versus cutting straight through someone's land. So paralleling is another pretty big factor that we talk about a lot. And in particular for our more rural landowners, we want a higher amount of paralleling in general, because that means you're not creating that habitat fragmentation, because it's already following a linear fragmentation that's already happened in terms of a road or transmission line. So paralleling is another one that we talk a lot about. This next one is, it says prudent avoidance, which really will convert to in terms of the application means limiting the amount of impacted habitable structures. So that means those habitable structures within 500 feet of the center line. They want to have that number be quite low, because they don't want to be impacting people's homes, right? So cost and number of habitable structures are usually two very strong factors that the commission is going to look at. And then I would say the third one is paralleling. But prudent avoidance does have a definition under the Texas Administrative Code. It's the limiting of exposure to electric and magnetic fields that can be avoided with reasonable investment of money and effort. So it's not just that it's avoiding houses, it's that it's avoiding houses at a reasonable cost as well. Commission also has to consider engineering constraints, right? Does it have to go around a cell tower? Is there an airstrip or airport somewhere where it would make it difficult, or they'd have to lower the lines or something like that? So they do look at those engineering constraints, and they are supposed to look at them moderating the impact on the affected community. So that is another thing that another factor they're trying to weigh all of these in the best way possible to pick a route that satisfies this criteria. But like, how do we do that, right? You'll notice some of these factors can be quantitative, right? It's going to be a number, and some of it can be qualitative, right? Aesthetics is one of those that's more qualitative. So how do we argue about this? How do we present information about it? What really happens in a transmission line routing case? So I mentioned an environmental assessment earlier that will be attached to the application that will have been commissioned by the utility company. But what does that look like? So in terms of the data, this is what it will look like. And you'll notice that this first big chunk of them are land use categories. And so they go through and they will measure all of these for each route and for each segment, right? So the length of the transmission line, the number of habitable structures, the length of right-of-way using existing transmission line right-of-way. And so you'll see there are all these little data points that they're going to collect for each segment and for each route. You see the aesthetics ones, the ecology, that environmental impact, and then your cultural resources is cut off a little bit, but it's going to be, length of a line over a high potential for archaeological artifacts and things like that. So these are some of the numbers that we look at when we're trying to decide what is a good route, or what the commission is going to look at to decide that. You'll notice this was an interesting case. Sometimes these categories change a little bit. This case was done in outside of San Antonio. So they had gone in and had mapped the area of golden cheek warbler habitat, and they designated the moderate and high quality acres in this one to kind of show that. Sometimes you'll see, sometimes utilities will also indicate conservation easements potentially. It's these categories there's not a requirement that they include those, but they are trying to capture the uniqueness of the area, but also put some numbers behind it. So what are some, key things to take away from this presentation and what you can do? landowners do have rights in the process. You have the opportunity to be heard. You have due process rights in this. So please, please, please participate. It really makes a huge difference, particularly on these 765 kilovolt lines. They are going to be like nothing we've ever seen before. And so it is important that you participate in it and have you do have influence in it. And then early engagement is critical, right? Going to those open meetings, filling out those questionnaires and being ready for that intervention and not waiting to the last minute and thinking about what would a 765 kilovolt line look like on my property or any other transmission line. What could it do to it? Start thinking about those impacts, and so that you'll be prepared and ready to present that information and get that in a direct testimony when it happens. Because as I said, you only have 180 days, and the administrative law judge takes 60 of that just to do the proposal for decision to the Public Utility Commission. So you have got to be ready. So early engagement is very important. And of course, this is a really technical area of the law, and a lawyer can help. And I will say, not just any lawyer. There is probably, I would say, about 30 to 40 transmission line lawyers who do this kind of work. We see each other all the time. It's a small legal community, but having someone with knowledge about how this process goes is very helpful, because it's weird, because it is regulatory law and administrative law, and it's got some weird rules in there. So if you can, certainly hire a lawyer. You don't have to. You can participate in these pro se, and the administrative law judges are quite patient with you, but there are some technical requirements, and that can trip up someone who's representing themselves in these in this process. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Francesca before we do questions.
Thank you so much, Carly. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed Carly's presentation. I wanted to talk to you all quickly about our monthly newsletter series. It's called the Texas Land Advocate. To subscribe, you can scan the code that is on your screen right now, or you can visit our website, and in any footer of any page, you can submit your first name, last name, and email. Through this series, we share important landowner alerts, firm updates, upcoming events, educational tips to help you navigate land ownership with confidence. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Carly for the Q&A portion.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to go through these. I think I can answer most of them. So I have some questions about the special commissioners involved in any way, and what do they determine as fair and just payment, and kind of what happens on the condemnation side. So until the PUC orders the route at their open meeting, right? That's the last little part. At that point, when they order the route, that is when the utility has condemnation authority. Up until that point, they can't come and take your land unless you agree to it. But after that final order happens, then the utility company will go back. They will send letters to all of the landowners who are on the route that is chosen, and then they will start the condemnation process with that. So I think what's really difficult for a lot of landowners in the PUC routing process is that actually there isn't discussion or much discussion about the loss of property value to your property, because it's not a routing factor. Cost is only considered in terms of the entire project. So the financial impact to you is not necessarily, it's not a routing factor, even though that is really a big driving factor as to why people participate and do not want transmission lines, right? So the special commissioners are not involved. There isn't that amount of money is not figured out until you move to the condemnation side and the eminent domain side after the route has been after the route has been selected. There's another question about the 180-day clock. On the 3 765 lines, the 180-day clock has not started on any of those yet. We anticipate, this is based on the utilities, they have said that they want to file their applications this December or November, maybe into January. I hope it's into January because I don't want it ruining everyone's holiday plans, but that's the approximate timeline when they would file their application, and that is what starts the 180-day clock there. So someone also asked, can a 765 kilovolt line be physically installed in the same right-of-way as an existing 345? I am not an engineer, but my guess would be no, simply because of the amount of electromagnetic fields that are being thrown off of those lines. They might be able to overlap them a little bit, but it is a little, we'll see. I don't know exactly how much that overlap happens. So that's my best guess as pretending to be an engineer. Let's see. I'm gonna read this one's pretty long, so give me a second here. There's a question about the need for this project. So they have already decided that they've needed it. They've already done their resiliency plan for those 765 lines. So in terms of, I know that it's difficult, but these projects are going, it's my opinion, I think it's the opinion of most people in my position, and the utilities and in the other energy regulators in the state of Texas, the 765 lines are coming. You're not going to be able to stop them. So we're going to have to come up with a route and participate in that route selection process because that need has already been identified. So redoing the existing 345 lines, the 345 lines, in order to get to the capacity that the 765 lines require, they have to put it's like 5 345 kilovolt lines going down a highway, which means they can't stack them, right? And they don't put them high up in the air. So that's just a wider swath of those lines coming through than what a 765 kilovolt line would look like. So that is why they are looking at this 765 versus 4, 5, 6, 345 kilovolt lines because of the efficiency, and it's a lesser footprint. Now, it's not a lesser footprint to the person getting that 765 line, of course not. But in total, it is a lesser footprint. There's a question, what are the advantages of an organized responses during the intervention process? So I will tell you that many times in these proceedings, we build landowner coalitions. So you get your neighbors together, and because you have aligned interests, you can get one lawyer to represent multiple of you, and y'all are in the same position that you don't want this segment or maybe a couple of segments coming through here. So you are able to pool your resources to hire an attorney, potentially hire an expert, and have more voices as a part of the process in order to influence that line. So that is the advantage of being organized and really getting your landowner groups together. There's a question, can a solar and wind project take advantage of its proximity to 765 line? That is the conventional wisdom, yes, that they could take advantage of that. and not just the wind and solar, but also a battery storage or a data mining center or oil and gas production as well. If your property is selected, are there monthly payment options if a structure is placed on the land, or is it one-time payment the only option? Unfortunately, one-time payment is the only option. You are paid for you will be compensated for an easement that will run with the land, and it is a one-time payment. It's not like an oil and gas royalty or anything like that. This is a really common question that we get. I wish it was a monthly payment, but unfortunately, that is not how our eminent domain and condemnation rights work. You will know when the application has been filed. If you're an impacted landowner, you will receive a letter from one of the utility companies. So there is that. Also, I will tell you the Public Utility Commission of Texas has an online filing system. It's called the PUC Interchange. That's how we file everything. That's where they file their application. So if you ever want to look up what's going on one of these applications, you can use the interchange. And so I would say once word gets out on the street, you'll be able to look that up. It'll have a docket number. That docket number will start with a 5. And it will then, you'll be able to look up with that docket number everything that's happening. It'll have the application, it'll have the direct testimonies, it'll have the orders from the judge, it'll be the repository for all of the things happening in that proceeding. This is a good question. If your home is within 500 feet, are you compensated? You, under eminent domain and condemnation law, you are only compensated if your property is crossed by the easement. So, for example, there are many times a home could be within 500 feet of the transmission line. However, they are not crossed with the transmission line easement. And so you will not be compensated for that. That is, under the law, they call it a community damage. But you are only compensated if you are crossed with the easement. Is going through these. There's a question about, can you be compensated for future loss of income? That would depend on what kind of income you're talking about, and that would be determined in the condemnation proceeding if the route was selected that crossed your land. So in terms of, if you're talking about cows grazing, your cows will still be able to graze under the transmission lines. So you will likely not be compensated for that. But there are transmission lines, and their easements do greatly restrict what you can't build in the right of way, right? So that is important to note, and to, that can have implications for your condemnation case. I think that's about it.
All right, thank you so much, Carly. And there's been a couple of questions of if you can get a copy of this presentation today. So we have been taking a recording of Carly's presentation, and we'll be sharing that with you afterwards. And then just so you remember, please sign up for our newsletter. We send monthly updates. Check out our news blog on our website. Carly has authored many blogs and pieces that can keep you informed and educated. And then just, her contact information is there on the slide if you want to reach out after this presentation today. Thank you all so much for attending, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.